Hi everybody, as promised, here is part 2 of types of nonverbal communication. So we have covered 3 types already and there are 4 remaining, so there's 7 total. The previous video reviewed, go back to those, chronemics, artifactual, and then also smell, and now we're going to be talking about touch, paralinguistics, proxemics, and I can never say this, kinesics. I always want to try to say kinetics, but it's kinesics. Thank you, Google Translate, for helping me not translate. However, the Google speaker thing, it always helps me remember how to say it. So that one always throws me off for whatever reason. All right. So the next one to talk about is nonverbal communication through touch. So physical interactions tell a story. I don't know if anyone has ever done a handshake where the individual's wrist was very limp. It's, for me, that is a verbal communication that someone's not confident. They might be adverse to touching. I make up a story in my head. Honestly, like limp handshakes tend to creep me out. And that's the narrative I attach to it. I might not necessarily know the full story behind it. But I'm making up a story based on kind of my interactions with that piece of physical touch. Now, physical touch can be kind of controversial. The Code of Ethics talks a lot about appropriate boundaries. Is having physical interactions with your clients appropriate? And you always want to err on the side of caution that no, it is not appropriate. So I know we talked in class about extending hugs. Is that something that's appropriate? Is it not? Entering into that space, is that something that is therapeutic, inappropriate? I would say 9 times out of 10, I would avoid having physical contact with your clients if not possible. However, there are times where there can be a therapeutic benefit to it. But I will say, if you're ever hugging somebody, typically you think about like from the opposite gender, but if you're working with clients who are attracted to your specific gender, I would always avoid having any sort of front-to-front hugs. Always want to do the side hug. It expresses a way different intent than front hugs. Side hugs are a little bit more neutral as far as like sexual advances, or could be misinterpreted as a sexual advance. So there's a level of appropriate and inappropriate touch. It's kind of knowing your client, knowing the context, knowing how they would interpret it. But again, refer to the Code of Ethics and kind of err on the side of caution. But even thinking about nonverbal communication outside of the therapeutic relationship, how we interact with others, we can also look at that as well. Thinking about how different touches express different things. So this YouTube clip that I have on here actually is from our favorite movie, 50/50. And Anna Kendrick really awkwardly touches Joseph Gordon-Levitt's hand. And he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, that's what they teach us in school, that expresses that I care." So she had a message she was intending through the touch, but it was not taken well by the client because they had not established trust at that point. All right, paralinguistics is the next nonverbal communication. So these are aspects of spoken communication that do not involve words, but the delivery of how you are saying things. So I tend to talk with a very animated pitch and tone. I have a lot of inflections. I go up and down. It is who I am, and I've had to embrace that. But I've had times once when I was in college and I was recording some radio ad for Kuiper. I was sharing my story, and the individual who was in charge of recording it made me stop and said that my tone of voice made me sound really ditzy because I was going up and down too much. And so, 13 years later, I still carry that with me because that left a lot of an impression on me. But I'm very mindful of that when I'm now doing more serious things or knowing the audience, kind of keeping more of a neutral tone can project a different message than when I get really excited and go up and down. The other time my paralinguistics made an impact in professional life is when I interviewed at Cherry Health, the individual who decided to hire me said he almost didn't hire me because I was so expressive and so, elevated. He thought that my general disposition and delivery would trigger the manic clients into having manic episodes, because often individuals will match and mirror someone else in front of them. And so he thought that because how I talked and my tone and my pace and my was going to trigger clients into mania. Thankfully, he took a chance and still hired me, and we laughed about it. But again, it's one of those things that always kind of left an impression on me that I'm very aware if I'm working with a client who might be more resistant or more in a depressive state. Maybe my tone and excitement needs to be taken down a little bit because it doesn't necessarily match the mood and the tone of the conversation. Pauses are really important, kind of paralinguistic piece of nonverbal communication. We're going to talk a little bit about this more when we get into some of the engagement and data collection techniques, is doing pauses and having silence. Gives space and room for the client to talk. It allows for processing. It also can invite conversation in when you want the client to talk more and they're feeling really awkward, so they want to break the silence. It's a really powerful tool, and there's actually a handout in your Individuals and Families Bible that I gave you last week. Being mindful of some of those other nonverbal cues of like sighing or laughing or like whatever. A client might hear them and interpret them and not be amused by them. And proxemics is the language of space and distance. So the good old COVID-19 pandemic taught us a lot about the importance of space and distance. So we heard ad nauseum, 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart, social distancing, 6 feet apart. But I guess it does really speak to the importance that space and distance and the message that it can convey. So individuals who didn't respect the 6 feet apart could convey a message that they didn't care about getting sick, they didn't care about the government, they weren't taking it as serious as individuals who were, but then individuals who weren't doing 6 feet might have interpreted individuals who did as paranoid or overly cautious or brainwashed by the government. And so just that piece of space in that example really shows that distance and space can convey a message that we intend to or not. So the greater the distance, the less intimate. We kind of had that when we were doing the chair exercise in class when Tiara came up front and where we were positioning the chair. Everyone identified that the closer the better, but not too close to make it uncomfortable. So if you are looking at kind of the concept of personal space, usually personal space is defined as 1.5 to 4 feet, kind of bubble around a person is usually an individual's identified personal space. Sometimes you're a really close talker, so they might err more towards the 1.5 feet versus the 4 feet. Others prefer greater distance for whatever reason. And then socially acceptable distancing is usually anywhere from 4 to 12 feet. 12 is obviously getting further apart, but there's still some level of social interaction that could come with that. And then public space is usually anywhere from that 12 to 20 feet. And so distance can tell a story. Clinically, most therapeutic distancing is identified around the 4 feet space. So staying in that social kind of distancing, not the 6 feet social distancing, but on the lower end of the social distance parameter. So that does beg the question then, when you were doing therapy during the pandemic and you were required to be 6 feet from your client, you're a little bit further away in a therapeutic space. So how do you compensate and still be engaged if your physical distance is conveying a different message? So that's a leaning forward, maintain that eye contact, really demonstrating that good solar to show that you are engaged in what the client is saying. The final one is kinetic. You know what I'm trying to say. But that's all about the body movement and what that communicates. So the open closed posture. If your arms closed, are you disengaged? Excuse me, fidgeting. An interesting one that I always like to point out is if there's the presence of needle marks or evidence of drug use, that can tell a story if your client is expressing that they are in a period of sobriety, yet you're seeing a lot of tracks or needle marks. That nonverbal part of the body can tell a different story. The same thing with like sweating or the shakes. Those could be signs of a withdrawal or somebody being under the influence. Biting the lip is usually an expression of nervousness. Dilated pupils can be under the influence, or there's the nervousness associated with lying. FBI agents will do a lot of reading of these types of nonverbals because there are studies showing that different, like the sweating or the bobbing of your Adam's apple or looking a certain way or avoiding eye contact can be an indicator that the person is trying to cover something and is lying. So these are the different types of body movements that then also can indicate a story. So you want to be observant in your clients and what they're portraying, but also being mindful of what you are portraying to your clients, like with the arms closed or crossed and having closed posture, or the lack of eye contact that you might have with them might indicate to them that you're not interested. So just being mindful of that as well. I also like this little cartoon over there. The cat is showing some nonverbals that do not match the message they are saying. So I'm going to post this video on the Sakai page and have some comments around it, but it's a fun little video giving some examples of nonverbals. So why is this important to know? Often people notice our nonverbals more than our verbals. They might be aligned with what we are saying, or they might contradict what we are saying. And it's easy to lie verbally, but it's a little bit harder to lie non-verbally. So as part of our role as data collectors and assessors and being observant, these are going to give us cues and indicators of what might really be going on in our clients' lives. But then on the flip side, also remembering that we're sending a message through our nonverbals as well that can either hurt or help the therapeutic relationship. So how do we use these in session? Can help us sense the emotional state of the other person. So the other day in class, I had a student who was physically present, but I could read all of his nonverbals that something was going on. Kind of poked a little bit in class. He didn't really say much, but he came after class and disclosed some stuff that was going on. And I was like, I could tell in class that you were not feeling it. So I was a little bit prepared to have the conversation. So nonverbals really can present an emotional story that they might not be saying with words. Can be used to identify discrepancies. I talked about that a little bit earlier. If a client comes in saying that they're taking care of themselves, yet they present with a strong body odor or disheveled appearance, that's indicating a very different story. Can use them to build trust and rapport. So the open posture, eye contact, leaning forward, being a professional, all those things that we critiqued in the 50-50 video clip were those nonverbal. So correcting some of those could have built a faster rapport and a more trusting relationship off the bat. It's good and a good clinical tool to be able to match clients' nonverbals. So we tend to like others that match our same nonverbals. There are studies and evidence to show that that tends to reign true, that we tend to align and feel connected to others who are matching. So if you get really excited in a room and you're very demonstrative and very elevated, if nobody else in the room matches that, you kind of tend to back down or feel really stupid. But if you get another person who starts to match that, you might gravitate more towards that. That actually happened my first day of school and college. We had a dorm meeting and there was another individual who matched my enthusiasm and bonkersness, and we hit it off immediately and annoyed everybody on our floor, and we're actually still good friends to this day, and we laugh about our first impressions to everybody. But because we had a lot of the same nonverbals and the same presentation, we naturally gravitated towards each other because we felt comfortable and aligned with that person. So I'm going to actually put this just on the nonverbal and teleservices because I'm running out of time. I'm going to post this on the Sick High page.